Hello.
Hello.
All right. We're just waiting for the others to join. Ooh, are you eating seaweed? Oh, nice. Okay. I just saw a little bit of Korean writing at the top and I thought it was seaweed, but
I do love seaweed though.
it's so good,
love
right?
seaweed. So good.
It's good for you too.
Mm-hmm. Better than eating a lot of other things.
It's true. It's true. It's better than like, I don't know, chips or something, probably a lot healthier. So,
Yep.
okay. Hey, Renee.
Hello, hello. How's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
Good. Did you enjoy your break? Did you get a break?
I got the 1 week just like you guys did. So yes, it was nice. Although I mean I'm busy anyway, so having the evening off was
Yeah,
nice for sure. But yeah, it would have been nice to have a little bit of a longer one for sure. So we'll see.
I feel you.
Yep. On the bright side, a few more months, right? A couple months for all of you, and then you're off into the wilderness of professionalism to go work, which would be fun and scary, but you got it. Don't worry. Don't worry. We got a lot of stuff, and you guys have a lot of support with all the instructors. As you can see, even in the general channels, like there's still like we're still supporting grads from the previous term too. Like people come and asking us questions and feedback and stuff. Like the one girl, Angie, that was just in the general channel. Like for her, like she reached out a whole bunch to me. I've tried to like send her jobs and like there's a whole bunch of stuff. So it's not like once you guys are done, we're just going to be like, okay, mess like,
That's cool.
off you go into the distance now. We'll never speak to you again. So
Oh,
unless you want that,
that's
I mean, if
nice.
you
That's
want that, we could do that. So we could just be like, okay, bye, and I'll never
no,
talk to you again. But
please don't. Please don't run away.
nope, nope, we're all good.
Um, I guess because is this the first time you guys have had like two cohorts in one Slack?
It is, yeah. This is the first time we've had two cohorts overlapping. Period. I mean, most of us, like Rod, me, Layla, like pretty much everyone here, we've only really been in focus for like maybe a year now or so. Like we haven't been there that long, so I don't know about previous instructors had they had overlap, but when we started, it was one group and that was it. And then literally they sprung it on us. Not sprung it, but they just messaged and said, "Oh, what's your schedules like? Can you all do like an extra class with a new cohort?" We're like, kinda, I guess. We'll see. And it was literally like a week or a week and a bit between this and that. I was just like, oh my goodness. So, but yeah, this will be interesting. We'll see how these new folks are, and you guys can be the older cool kids. It's like you're in high school all over again, and you can just kind of like pick on all of them and be like, "Oh, we're gonna give you swirlies and wedgies and shit." Just make fun of them. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Lee.
Hello, everyone.
Chris.
Sorry I'm late.
All good. All good.
Grocery order arrived just as class started.
Oh,
All right. So yeah, we'll get started now that everyone is here, and I don't have to check for the participants. Yeah, so as I was just saying, yeah, welcome back. I was just telling Renee as well before some of you joined that as you guys might have noticed, if you're on Slack, yeah, I mean, we have 3 months left basically, so pretty much till the end of the year, and then you guys are kind of done with this program. But like I was saying, it doesn't mean that you guys are done, and you can never speak with us again or be in contact with us. You're more than welcome to, and obviously you're welcome to connect with us via like LinkedIn or whatever as well. I know all the instructors there are fairly active and are on there. And yeah, like I was saying before, some of those students, depending on how much effort they want to put into it, I guess a lot of them have come back and asked questions from us on Slack still around, work stuff, portfolios, interviews, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, one or two of them definitely have gotten work and have moved on. A few of them, I think, have gone to do their own things or continue their education. And some of them have just not wanted to interact with the school afterwards, and that's fine. But yeah, don't feel like once you're done that there's no more of a connection for all of us, because there still is, and you're very much welcome to continue to message and ask questions and all that kind of good stuff. Yeah, as we were saying, new cohort as well starting, so you guys are the cool kids. I don't know anything about them, just like I didn't know anything about any of you guys when we started this, so it'll be very interesting to see. The only intel I got from Layla was that one or two of the students, I think, are not quite as maybe as tech savvy or used to some technical stuff, so it'll be a little bit different for them, I guess, learning online, number one, and number two, learning a bunch of new tools and programs they might not be familiar with. But that being said, for us, we're going into now the second term or second semester. So let me quickly share my screen with you all and can go over a couple stuff here. Yeah, so I will share this out. I haven't shared this out just yet. I will throw this into the server. I've created a new term thing for you guys, a new folder for term 2 assignments and stuff like that, and just a general term 2 for the resources. We're able to look at all the slides and all that other stuff that we'll be sharing. So the course outline's nothing, excuse me, nothing too crazy. The beginning stuff's all the same usual crap that you'll normal read. It's just the standard school stuff. Again, just saying that everything's on Moodle, blah, blah, blah. So your marks are marked, by the way. Before I get any further, I did mark your final assignments. Really well done on everyone's part. If you guys would like, we can definitely go over them in this class. Otherwise, there's other stuff we can cover, and I do want to give you guys time to do assignments and other things that we'll need to do as we go on with this. But other than that, I did want to stop and say that even though we weren't quite in that last class, together. I did look at them, and yeah, I'm really impressed with all your work. I obviously also saw a lot of that tie-in to what Layla showed on Slack, and she kind of shared some of your work and said, here's some really good samples, covers and pamphlets and stuff. So really awesome. I'm liking how all of it's tying together. It doesn't just feel like singular things you're doing and then it's just kind of like busy work. It does feel like this all kind of blends in together. So I think that's awesome. But yeah, all this stuff will be on Moodle still, marks and all that good stuff. And then all the recordings as well will be up there. I know I'm not the best at Moodle, mostly just because I hate the way the interface works and it's kind of an actual pain in the ass to use. It's really not intuitive at all, but hey, that's what you get when it's an open source software that a bunch of developers got together and decided to make for the goodness of people's hearts, but just not as user-friendly as it could be. So yeah, basically, I'm just going to go over high level. I'm not going to get into the details of like homework or assignments, but yeah, we're just going to be, over the next 13 classes, we're going to be, this term is going to be a lot more focused as one big section of work, if you want to think about it like that. I think I mentioned this in the previous term as well, that this one, even though I'm giving you 3 assignments, they're all basically part of one larger assignment. So don't feel like they're, devoid of each other, like you're just doing one thing and then the next assignment is something that's different and it doesn't relate to the previous one. This one's much more linear. It's kind of a build up. We're going to get our foundational stuff, as you can see here in a little bit of the brief. And then we're going to be doing and focusing a lot more on things like planning and testing and mapping stuff. So a lot more conceptual work, a lot more thinking work, as opposed to say design work necessarily. So I know up until this point, I've mostly given you assignments around like Photoshop and like, design this thing, design that. This is still that, but it's also much more specifically UX now. I wanted to make sure up until this point, you guys felt comfortable with Photoshop, you had comfortability with the tools, you kind of understood things like typography, and you understood a little bit of things like color, which you've all demonstrated really, really well over each assignment that you've done. I've noticed the huge increase each time you've done one in terms of like, spacing and just like general design, things that you gravitate towards, like all of that stuff's been refined more and more and more. So this is just a natural progression of that too. But in the way that we're doing it here, we are much more UX related. So we are going to be thinking a lot more about like testing and envisioning, mapping stuff, site mapping, all that kind of stuff. So it's not as flashy design work, but it's still really important and it will impact the end goal. So that's basically what we're going to do. As you can see, like, week 3, for example, we're going to get more into wireframes again. We're getting into usability. Again, we're getting into consistencies and details. We're going to talk a little bit about visual direction. Then by the time we get into week 4, which is about a month, we'll be into that sort of first prototyping phase, which is really getting used to, number one, how to use it. So this is the point where we'll start branching a little bit away from Photoshop. You can still make your designs in Photoshop, but actually to do the prototyping, we'll be using other software outside of it. And I'll show you in advance, it's not as difficult as it sounds. It's actually not that much work. And there's multitudes of software to do it, and they're all pretty much free. So there's not a cost associated with it. There's not a huge learning curve, and they will provide a lot of value to you guys as well. So we'll get into that. We'll get into prototyping softwares, trial and error. We'll get into user testing and feedback, which should be fun. This will be great for you guys to actually test with like friends, family, partners, whatever. It will be awesome for that. As we keep going, we'll be designing things for like mobile as well, or thinking a little bit more about mobile. We'll be talking a lot more about accessibility. So again, some of those feature sets, colors, things that you might not think is for somebody with an accessibility aspect, this will cover a lot of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll talk a little bit further about human-computer interaction. We basically touched on it very lightly in the first term around like how people interact with technology and machines, and that we're a multi-device world now, that we're not a singular, just a computer. Now we're on tablet, phone, etc. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that. We'll kind of divulge near the end a little bit and talk a little bit about psychology of interaction design too. Again, the idea behind the term user, what does it mean to be a user versus like somebody who's actually, creating some of this stuff, things like muscle memory, things like decision making, problem solving, much more of that kind of stuff. Again, much more theoretical, not as designy, but again, very important still, and does play a big factor in how you do design. Everything that you touch and see from a product perspective. When you go to the grocery store and you get cereal, or you go and you buy, deodorant or razor blades or whatever, all that stuff, somebody has done some psychological stuff behind it. There's a tremendous amount of thought work put into things like the color, the type of font. You'd be surprised how many meetings go into stupid things like, well, is this corner rounded enough? Or do we need to make it more soft? Or like, is this like, more holistic? Does this fit into this theme? How do people react to this? Like, it's a lot of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of psychology behind it. So I don't want to ignore that. And I do want to touch a little bit upon that. So we'll get into it. We'll talk a little bit about augmented reality too, and virtual reality, which is kind of fun. Obviously, much harder to do, digitally in this way. And obviously, we don't have the hardware here to do it, but it is really fun to think about that. And it is becoming a bigger component and a bigger thing. I'm sure some of you might have seen the news in tech around Facebook pushing into this space again. They partnered with Ray-Ban to do those creepy sunglasses that nobody wanted for like $200. You can buy Ray-Bans and then apparently like take what does Facebook call it, like live story things or whatever. I don't know. They have like their own version of clips or something, and basically you wear these stupid sunglasses and you can do them faster, which nobody wanted. It's creepy as fuck and they're expensive, and it's like, why is the biggest question. But hey, somebody thought this was a good idea. Snapchat's been trying to do this now for the last year and a bit. Google Glass did this way back in 2013, 2014. So the idea of augmented reality in smart glasses or like apps and stuff has not gone away. We'll talk a little bit about VR too, and the different headsets and the tech that goes into it. There's a huge amount of this going on right now. I can tell you even that right now, because I do work, I have a sort of an ongoing freelance gig with Accenture, which is one of the big consulting companies, one of the big five. They are talking a tremendous amount about VR. Like, it's every channel that I'm in, it's what I hear is like, oh, we need to do this VR thing, oh, this VR thing. So even though it's a lot of smoke and mirrors, there's a lot of talk behind it. So I think within the next 4 to 5 years, you will see a flood of enterprise, high level business application use type VR stuff. So I think we'll get into that too. We'll talk a little bit about like, intuitive products that kind of imitate physics or like real things, real world objects, and then how like that kind of worked in. So we'll get into some history there and some other design. Again, much more theoretical, a little bit more fun. And then we get into the last sort of ending classes, which is formalism and design as a whole. Presentation, stuff like that. I know we do this as a class together, and you guys are actually really good about presenting your, work. You can definitely go in and we'll talk a little bit about that too, how to just be a better presenter, things to look out for, wording and stuff like that. I mean, don't feel like you have to be a pro at this. It's definitely something that I'm still learning. Even when I present at work to people that I know, I still choke up once in a while, or I forget something, or I go too fast, or I go too slow. So it's a fine art. It's something that you learn over time, but it's definitely important as well. So, and then lastly, final class is just sort of presentation. We'll do a quick sort of review, which will be a lot because it'll be like 2 terms worth, but we'll do a quick review. And then at that point, I'll open it up to questions and sort of Q&A and wrap up and all that good stuff. So it's basically it in a nutshell. Like I said, it's a lot more theory. It's a lot more, it is still design. There'll be a lot of like drawing and design work happening. It's just not as much as, I guess, previously, in the sense that we're not going to like, each project again is going to be very different. So as you can see, there's basically only 3 assignments, and I can get into them pretty quickly. If I actually scroll back here to the top, apologies for the quick scroll. The first one I'm going to ask you guys to do is, again, very similar to what we did before, which is around personas. So I'm going to be asking you guys to basically create more around them, around a specific project. And really what I want you guys to start thinking about now, and you have plenty of time to do this, is think about what kind of a platform or website or an app that you'd like to create that spans, multiple pages, that has multiple things involved. Because basically the work that you're going to be doing now will kind of lead into that. So these personas that I'll be asking you to create will tie into that work. It's not just create a persona that has no linkage to anything. It's going to be very specific about like, okay, what do you actually want your final project to be? What sort of, web design or app design would you actually want to design? If anything was, up in the air, you had any choice, what would you want to do? Start thinking around that. So it's a little bit of a twofold. I'm not asking you to think about the actually what the thing is going to be, but I am going to ask you to think around who is this for and who is that person specifically. But I'll get into the assignment stuff near the end, or probably midway into the class. So don't worry about it too much at this moment. But the other assignments basically is going to be, again, like a prototype, like a sort of like that digital prototype that I mentioned before. So at this point, I'd like you guys to have or start thinking around designing a couple screens or multiple screens and really starting to think how they all tie together. Kind of in the last assignment, in the final assignment of term one, I asked you to do, the cities or the areas that you were interested in terms of travel or tourism, and you created a city, or you took a city and you made a couple pages. Now you're going to start thinking about the navigational jump points from there, saying like, well, maybe I'll have a couple buttons there on that page. Well, what happens if I click that button? Where do I go? What does that page look like? That's where we're going to start to sort of flesh this out. So the designs will become much more, there'll be more of them, you'll have more pages, but realistically, you're just kind of cohesively building like a full wraparound kind of experience. That's kind of what this will be. It sounds like a lot more work than it is, but trust me, it's actually not too bad. It's quite manageable. And then again, when we get there, I'll explain it in detail. And then basically the final assignment, which is like the last kind of assignment. Where is it here? I missed it. How did I put it? No. I might have missed it. Anyway, I'll find it for you. I don't want to take too much time, but basically the final assignment is just sort of a high level polish of all of that stuff. So it'll be, you'll have your personas that are already done. You'll have this prototype that you kind of started to work through some of these screens in a low fidelity stage. And then the final is basically a nice high polished final, final pictures, final color, final icon, where you take a lot more time. For the final, if I recall, I think it's like 6 weeks. So you have an ample amount of time to actually do it. Again, the first assignment's pretty short, so you'll have a little bit less time. The second one, you'll have progressively more time. And then the third one is the most amount of time. Again, the marks will be much more higher though. They won't be like 10%, 15%. It'd be like 20% and upwards for each one. So I will say, take more time to do them. Don't feel like you have to rush. We have a lot of time to go through and really do this. Again, it's just 3 assignments over the course of basically 3 months. It's almost like an assignment a month, give or take, if you want to think about it like that. That's basically it in terms of the overview. Do you guys have any questions around any of this stuff? I mean, of course, I'll share this out and you can look at your own leisure, but just if you have any high level thoughts or anything that is on your mind, I'm happy to answer now. Okay, cool. If that sounds good for all you, then let's jump into our first sort of week here and sort of first class. So like I said, this one's more about ideation and articulation of those ideas and stuff like that. So I didn't prepare an actual slide for you in this case. I just grabbed a web link because it kind of encapsulates what I was going to say anyway quite well. And instead of me just like rewriting a lot of that, I'm just going to actually take you through it and talk about those points and what does that mean. And then I'm going to actually share out the link, of course, as well. And you're always, of course, having this recording to look back to as well. So the one thing is basically what I'll say here is that it is about design and research. Like I said early on when we started this, this class or this course, UX for the most part is a lot about research. I mean, I spend not a tremendous amount of time, but I would say I spend probably the first quarter or more of my actual time on a project doing research. And what I mean by research, and not to tangent too far away from that, is basically something like this, right? Like, so right now as part of my work, I'm doing research on patient intake forms. So this is the forms that you get when you go to a doctor's office. If you go to like the dentist, you go for a checkup for your GA, they usually ask you to sign a form of some kind, right? If you're a new patient, they usually ask you for, your address, your name, blah, 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 your ID, all that kind of stuff. So that's what we do as well as part of the company that I work for now. We actually have intake forms that we create for clinics to use. Obviously, because we deal with audiology, it's a little bit different than say a dental office or an optometrist or something like that. But each one of them still generally does similar forms, right? You still need, a customer form. You still need a health form. You probably need, are they being referred to by your previous doctor? Like, do you have another GP or someone else that's sending you over, or et cetera? Or maybe that other person, is out of business or they closed down or whatever. So there's all these different forms. There's COVID forms for anyone who's gone into any place recently. There's COVID waivers you have to sign. They have all the check boxes and stuff. So this research is actually looking into how all of that stuff is done through other platforms. So when I do research, I basically look at some competitors, right? So right now I've looked at these three. I looked at Jane App, I looked at Blueprint and Counselor. The names are irrelevant, doesn't really matter. The main thing to note is that there's three competitor apps I'm looking at, and each of them roughly do the same thing. And what I do is basically I actually look at their website, and what I do is I look through their website, I look through their YouTube videos, I scour the online for forums or message boards or anything I can basically glean into how this platform works. Like literally, how does it look like? What does the UI look like? What's the UX look like? YouTube's great for this because you can actually watch people do tutorials around like how to use their service and software and stuff like that. So for these three, I was able to actually look at YouTube for the most part and actually just kind of, go through their videos and be like, oh, okay, they're talking about this now, and just kind of like listen to what they're saying. Of course, they're very high level in general. So for me, I can only take so much of it. And most of it's just, fluffy stuff. But basically what I do is I go in and actually take screenshots. Like this is an actual screenshot from Jane. Jane is a wellness app, by the way. If any of you go to like, Cairo, or you do any sort of like physiotherapy or anything like that, most clinics use Jane. They also do it for yoga. They do it for wellness as well. So if you go to like a spa, some of them use it. It's pretty popular. It's from North Vancouver. They're a relatively big and growing company. But yeah, they actually have quite a good UX overall. The UI is a bit questionable in my opinion, but overall their UX is really solid. So there's actually a really good amount of research that I can take from them. So I look at things like, what do their customer forms look like, right? And then I make notes about it. I say, okay, this looks like this. This is here. These are the things that I've noticed about this. For example, with Jane, if I'm a new patient going into a clinic of some kind, and I've never filled out any forms that they've sent me either via email or text or anything, Jane actually groups them together for you. So they'll say like, okay, you got to do this form, then you got to do this one, then you got to do that one. I can't skip ahead and be like, oh, fuck it, I don't want to do the patient profile one. I want to do like the COVID one first. They actually send it to me in order, and I actually have to do them in order before I can see the other forms. That's unique to Jane. Maybe other ones do it too, but for my research, I was able to gather that. So that's pretty cool. And then I break down like, from the other end, if I'm actually the person working at the clinic using Jane, how do I create an intake form for somebody else, like a customer, to use and actually go through step by step? And I actually screenshotted like, what did they do? And, what does it work? And so on. And I made notes for myself and for my team so that they can read over this and say, oh, okay, there's like different treatments you can pick. For example, there's different things as part of the profile, what appears on the form, what's required versus what's not required, etc. Like little things you don't really think about just generally, but they're basically very important UX aspects, right? It's around, well, what is somebody going to see when they get this, right? Like, how does it look from the customer's perspective, but also how does it look when I'm actually making it myself, right, for that customer? So I go step by step, taking screenshots, and then I say, here are things that stick out to me. For example, on this step, it's the insurance information step. You can actually take a photo of your insurance card. So if you have like, Blue Cross, or you have like Sun Life, or any additional sort of private insurance, you can take a photo of it, and you can also ask if you want to take the front of the card or the back of the card or both sides of the card, which is actually kind of neat. It's actually pretty cool that you can capture that information right on this on the software without having to manually type in or write in all that information. If you do this as a living, it can get really tedious if you got to fill in like tons and tons of these things, right? Like it's so much easier if you could just take a photo of this card and it just auto uploads, or it just, filters all that information, just puts it on the screen for you. So that kind of tech is really cool. There's questionnaires and there's all these forms you can create and stuff like that. So I made copious notes around all this kind of stuff. So when I'm saying like UX research, this is what I'm referring to, is like you're actually going into the weeds of like, how does this really work? Like exactly what can you do? What options are there? If I click this button, what shows up? Like really trying to figure it out. For you and for all of you, you might not need to go into this level of detail because you're not trying to necessarily figure out like how something works on every single piece, right? You just want a high level overview. That's totally fine. I have notes in here where I'm doing stuff that's not this detailed. I go to the next competitor, for example, I do the same thing. I grab some screenshots, talk about what kind of forms they have. As you can see, their UI is super fucking ugly and confusing. It's really old too, it looks really dated. It's really hard to focus it. So compared to Jane, this one looks really old and just, I don't like it at all. Surprised people use it, but they do. They have different, browser windows and different colors and things they can pick. Discrepancies in information, how do they handle that? For example, you don't enter your address properly, you miss a number or something, right? You give it to the doctor or you give it to the clinic. Clinic looks at it, they have their own set of information because they've maybe looked at your card or something and they have it inputted. Now the system's like, hey, wait a second, you have two sets of information, one's right, one's wrong. Which one is it? That's actually useful to know because you don't want duplicate data or wrong data, right? You want the system to have nice, clean data. You want to be able to know the right phone number, the right name, the right email, the right address, etc. So it's kind of cool that they address things like discrepancies. They have preloaded forms, for example. So they have medical history, privacy waivers, medical clearances, COVID, etc., etc. So I went through and looked at all this kind of stuff. This is kind of what it looks like on their computer. Again, not very pretty, but they're relatively big. So anyway, not to bore you guys, but this is sort of some elements of that research. So in terms of design and research, yeah, that research part that I just showed you, that's what I mean by research, is like you're really going into something, you're taking screenshots of multiple things. You were actually trying to figure out, is there kind of another app or something that does something similar to what I want, what I'm looking for, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're making comparisons. You're saying, I like the way they do this. I really think this is a good feature. I like the way that this looks, or I like the way they wrote this thing. You write all that stuff down. It doesn't need to be, hyper detailed in your situations, like I did with mine, where I'm actually writing specific notes, but you're also not sharing it with the team. You're mostly just doing this for yourself. But that's kind of the mentality behind it. As I'm going into this, like there's also different kinds of research you can do. This article will mostly talk about a lot of what I call like really fluffy research, which is like really nice, like sexy research, where it's like, if you work for a big company like your Microsoft or your Amazons, or any of these ones, Uber, Renault, Qualcomm, like these are big companies, right? They're not like little mom and pop shops with like 100 people. They're thousands of employees. So they have the ability and the time to set up proper research sessions. They can do they have actual researchers. That's an actual job that they have there, versus, even in the place where I work, we don't have actual researchers, right? Like all the UX research is done by me and my teammates, and that's it. In a typical large company, you would have an actual UX researcher, and that's all they do, is everything I just showed you, where they'll do comparative analysis, they'll do interviews, they'll do surveys, they'll do deep dives, they'll figure all this stuff out, and then they'll give it to me or another designer and say, look, here's all my research, take all this stuff, figure out what you think works, and then actually draw a design based on that. So there's an actual logical flow to a lot of this stuff, which makes a lot more sense. The biggest thing as well in terms of research is really breaking it into two separate sections, which is qualitative and quantitative. These are really, really, really important, because a lot of people, first of all, don't know what they are, and second of all, if they don't address these, they usually don't get very good data as well. So you can kind of think about it like basically for quantitative data, it's a lot of like, yes, no ratings, metrics, like numbers and stuff like that. The other one for quantitative is basically like, on a scale or a sliding scale, like which one do you prefer? There's different metrics you can use. And obviously it's very general because I don't know how you're trying to gauge something with someone, because it can depend. But basically, those are sort of the high level overviews of what you should be looking for when you're doing it. Is, you're trying to see like what what they want without actually directly asking them that question. Because if you ask them, hey, what do you want? They don't know how to tell you. Most people don't. If you ask them for something, they'll just be like, oh, I just want it better. But that doesn't really, you don't really understand what that means, right? So when you're doing interviews and you're trying to ask somebody, hey, like, I know you want this website or this app to do a certain thing for you. Well, what is that thing that you want? Everyone wants it to be fast. Everyone wants it to be good, but those aren't really good metrics to follow because you can't really gauge how well you've successfully done anything because there's no, it's subjective too, right? It's so broad. So you really want to narrow it down to like, okay, what is the specific problem someone has? What are they specifically trying to accomplish? And sometimes they don't tell you up front because people are people and not everyone knows how to articulate what they actually want or what doesn't work. Sometimes if they're pissed, people will tell you really, really well what they don't like, but they not necessarily know how to fix it, or they don't always have suggestions around that. But some of the other things that we do, and again, we're not going to be doing this as much here because number one, it's a little bit more tricky, and number two, we just don't have the time. But things like usability testing, we'll do a little bit of this in this term because I do want you guys to get used to the ability of actually giving your designs to someone else to navigate and see what they think. Again, this is where the prototype stuff comes in, right? This is where having those screens and those designs really make sense. We probably don't have a ton of time to do A/B testing, but it's really useful. This is awesome to do if you're ever undecided about which option you should do. You have two really good designs and you're like, oh man, which one do I do? That's a perfect time to do A/B testing. You put it on the market, you ask a couple of people, say, hey, listen, do you like this one? Or do you prefer this one? Why? You know, what are the things you like? What are the things you don't like? What are the things that are missing, et cetera, et cetera. That's another great way of doing it. You can do surveys and questionnaires. This is just basic. You can use tools like SurveyMonkey or I think there's one from Google, forget which one it is, but there's a bunch of them that are free. You can set them up and ask questions, open-ended questions for people to answer online. You can even do it in person, just have them write down something on a clipboard or, you know, take notes. There's this other one, which we definitely can't do right now, which is sort of the guerrilla study areas, which is like you go into public places. This one's really interesting because a lot of the products that we use and take for granted, actually, they use this kind of methodology. Airbnb in particular actually did this. They actually went to people and asked them like, hey, like, you know, what do you think about this? Like, how would you find like housing or a hotel or something? What would you do? And they actually went to like places like Starbucks and they went to like, you know, public places and asked people in lineups like, hey, what do you think? Another example of this was like Bumble, the dating app. The lady that founded that, she went to like universities and schools and like did that. Same thing with Uber, same thing with Lyft, you know, Facebook. Like a lot of these were basically done like that, right? That just people going up to people and being like, yo, test this thing. A local example of this would be Smart Sweets, the candies. If you go to like London Drugs or Whole Foods, that girl, she did the same thing. She literally went into like a store and then just like sampled them and be like, hey, what do you think about this? Like, you know, what would you like? How do you feel about the taste, etc. So like there's a lot of that kind of stuff people did. I think number 4 works really well for actual physical things as well, like actual, you know, tangible elements. It's sometimes harder when the thing is software because it's not always easy to get somebody to understand what you're trying to do, you know, or see the benefit of that. So yeah, there's that. You can do personal interviews. Number 5, again, this is usually really good with people you feel comfortable with, maybe somebody you kind of know, you know, a friend, partner, whatever. You can do that. Again, usually you book like an hour. So again, give them time to kind of warm up and really ask them in-depth questions. And then the last one, I haven't personally heard as much, but I guess it's this other one called the diary study, which again, this is really time consuming, which is probably why we don't really see it, but this is like, you know, sort of lifetime value of a customer or a person, right? Where it's like a long period of time of looking at them and getting to really understand that. I would say this is more of a review over the lifetime of like, say, like a device or a product. Number 6 makes me think of someone who's like a reviewer, you know, like a tech reviewer or like a product reviewer, somebody who's going to like use something into the distance and not just for like a day or two, like maybe it's a couple months, and then they have detailed feedback. Like if somebody asked me like, hey, what do you think about like the Nintendo or like your AirPods, like I've owned them long enough where I can be like, yeah, I can give you a fucking full on breakdown of all the goods and bads of that stuff because I've owned and used it for so long. I know what works. But if it was just like a day or two, I'm not going to give you good data. So that's kind of how you can think about that. You can create them through the diary study again, but like I said, you probably want to do more than one person as well. One person is not enough. More people is always better. Greater volumes are always important. And try to have a varied group of people if you can. I know this sounds really hard, obviously, with COVID. It's like you can just waltz up to somebody and be like, yo, what do you think about this thing that I'm doing? And have them answer you. It's a little tricky now, but in traditional times, this is what you would have done is you would have tried to research or study more than one person. Ideally, like a couple groups of people. Again, in company settings, it's easy because you probably already have customers. You can just ask them or do research with them. Sometimes they don't want to talk to you. In my current situation now with my company, we don't always have that ability. So we try to just leverage as many people as we can internally who are not familiar with the product, like our salespeople. They haven't seen a lot of the stuff we're working on that's new, or maybe the sort of the marketing team. They might not see a lot of the stuff that we're doing for a while, so they're pretty new to it. We can like user test them. The other thing as well is like it's actually diversity in just it's also age and gender and all that stuff, right? I think a lot of people tend to go to their friends and say, okay, well, we're all the same age group. So like, hey, let's all take a look at this. That's great, but it doesn't give you a good accurate representation of how somebody else would use it. Somebody who's 60 and above is going to look at it differently than somebody who's 35 or somebody who's 20 or somebody who's, whatever. Again, men and women look at things differently too. You're going to have different breakdowns based on that. You're going to have different emotional responses and different aesthetic choices as well. So if you feel like the thing that you're designing or the product you want to design for is a very broad spectrum thing, it's probably a good idea to bring in, multiple different groups of people, whether it's age, gender, and so on, to get that perspective from them. I mean, this one's pretty basic, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory, but being empathetic. Again, this is just being a good researcher. It's kind of hard, right? Like, it's really tempting just to be like, well, I'm in my life, I'm in my position here, and so on. So like, whatever, right? I can't really understand this other person's problem the same way, right? So yeah, it is trying to put yourself in another person's shoes and trying to really understand what it is that they have to deal with and what their circumstances are. This isn't particularly important for people that live in different parts of the world that use an application that's really widespread. So I know they mentioned Uber here at the top, but yeah, Uber or Lyft or Facebook or any of those big things where like you have literally hundreds of millions of people using it across the world. It gets really difficult. Of course, everything we're doing here is not to that level, so there's not that worry. But again, think about it in a sense of like, well, who could potentially look at this, right? That gets into things like language and copy. I know I kind of talked to you guys about this before around thinking around like, well, it's great. You make a product, you make a beverage, or you make a website around travel. That might work for a local audience, but if you took it overseas, maybe those people wouldn't understand it the same way. If you have very particular humor or very culturally relevant humor, it might not always work as well. And sometimes those websites and products don't translate to other cultures and areas as well. So again, it's just being, thinking around that as well. And again, it's just being a good person, trying to really understand that not everyone's going to be as open or as, how should I say, direct with you in feedback as well. Even when I've done it, sometimes I've had to like really, poke and prod people because some of them were a little bit more shy. Some of them, they're like, it's not my first language, it takes me longer to understand, etc. So there's all those factors too. Other than that, other tips I can think around that they mentioned here is like, if you are doing like a sort of an interview with someone who's someone you don't know, don't just jump right into it. Don't just be like, okay, so we're gonna like get into this thing now and just like immediately go into it. Every single interview that I've done for work where I'm interviewing people to look at my designs, I always start with general banter, just like lighthearted chat around like, hey, how's your day, the weather, it sounds kind of boring, but like that, people like that kind of stuff. It just kind of puts them at ease a little bit more. I find that if you jump right in and you start immediately talking around what you want them to do, it kind of puts them on edge, and they're like, oh, okay, like this person's really kind of aggressive. I want to ease into this a little bit more. Some people are no nonsense and they're just like, fuck it, just get to the point. But you'll sense that. I think you'll have a good idea about who is like what, and so on. But yeah, keep it casual. It says here, talk to them about their family relationships and stuff. Yeah, I probably wouldn't say that. That's probably a no-no. Unless they start talking about it, don't bring anything up, because I always find that some people get very sensitive around it and just feels kind of like invasion of privacy. Honestly, it's really none of my business how someone else's things are going. If they want to talk about it with me and they feel comfortable, great. Otherwise, I try to avoid that kind of stuff. Try to keep it more high level, and just ask them, like, how their day is going with work, all that kind of stuff, and so on. What else? Yeah, trying to choose open-ended answers. Try not to pressure people for it too. I'm still learning this myself. Where it's sort of like I'm trying to get them to come to a conclusion themselves. Sometimes they don't. They don't necessarily do that, or they don't necessarily realize it, and they're kind of struggling. And then I don't want to give it away, but after a while, when you realize that somebody's struggling in a test, you just give it up. You just say, look, this is kind of this is the intention I wanted to go for. I guess it's not really clear. I can take this away and fix it, or come back to you next time with a revision, etc. Something like that. I've just had this happen to me a couple of weeks ago. I tested with a doctor. I showed her my design. I thought she would kind of get it. And I was like, so what does this make you think of? And she's like, I don't really know. Like, I think it's this, I think it's that. And I didn't want to like tell her like, it's actually this. I tried to get it out of her, but it was just too long and too awkward. So I ended up just being like, oh, okay, she didn't get it. She didn't get it. She didn't know what to say. I was holding on too long, and I should have just immediately been like, no, it's fine. It's supposed to be this. So there's a learning opportunity, but again, you get better and more familiar as you talk to people as well. So yeah, that's kind of it here. There's a whole bunch of other stuff actually in here as well. So I would encourage this, but I'm going to throw this whole thing up online on Slack, and you guys can look over it. Basically, I just wanted to go over and kind of show you the notes that I have within what I do for work, and then plus this. And I think that will be enough for you to kind of comprehend what you can think about. But for now, I would say as well, the next sort of steps for you would be really to think around what's the platform that you're looking to create? What's the thing that you'd ultimately love to be working on for the next couple of months? It does not have to tie into the other projects that are happening within school. It doesn't need to be, city travel, whatever you've been doing. It doesn't have to be your beverage or anything like that. It can be completely different. The reason I say this is because it is going to be our entire term. So I don't want you to think of a project and just do it and then be like, okay, well, I'm not really happy with this. I do want you to feel like it's something you're, and passionate about and want to pursue. Think around ideas now. You don't need to answer them now. You don't need to do it within this class today, but think around like what you want to do, like what it is you would like to build out, and try to keep it realistic, knowing you have a certain amount of time, knowing your own skill sets, knowing what you're capable of, saying like, okay, it's taking you X amount of time to do these screens in Photoshop with pictures and icons and text. How long would it take you if you had to do 3 times that much, for example, right? Stuff like that. That's kind of more or less, I think, what you can kind of think around. And then, yeah, just again, as a quick thing, we'll be using Figma for prototyping. It's quite simple and it's easy and it's free, but I won't get you guys to do this today or even next week. Probably in the 3rd week or so, we'll get into stuff like this. But basically, you can see here in this little GIF is like, you can see basically them, they've made these designs within the platform, and they have like these hotspots. So like you click the plus button and it brings up this little like slidey thing that like animates up. So you can see they're 2 separate pieces of art that they've created, but it looks like it's all one piece because it's on the phone. It looks like it comes up. That's all done within the software. You don't have to find the phone picture. You don't have to animate it, like, figure out how quick or fast. Like the software does a lot of that for you. Basically, all you need to do is just know, if I click a button, is this a pop-up? Is this a drop-down? Like, what is this thing doing? And then figure out what it looks like. And then the software does the rest for you. It puts it together for you nicely. So really easy to do that. again, stuff like this where you can like hover and you can do dissolves and you can do smart animations. So again, something like this, you click the plant, it gets big, like that transition. Again, the software does this. You don't need to actually, animate it or figure that out. It's all about, that design. So just some stuff to think about. Again, we'll get into this more when we get into the prototyping section. But just for now, just to wrap your heads around the idea that this is kind of what we'll be doing for that next assignment. The next big chunk is to think around number one, what it is that you want to do, and number two, how are you going to kind of like make that work, and what sections are interactable and not, and so on. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of cool stuff. You can do things like this. You can like click things and bring things up. This one's just saying you can do like comments. This will be useful between you and me as individuals, because I noticed that when I did this the first time, everyone did their assignment within their own Figma file, and I was able to comment in and give them feedback through there, rather than giving it to you on Slack or emailing it to you or waiting until class happens. When we start getting into this tool and you guys are ready and you're actually working within it, I'll be leaving your comments within the actual file and you'll see them pop up. It's quite conveniently placed. Again, it's not all over the place. So you can see them, and then you can also share the prototype out with anyone. So again, when you're ready and you want to test it with your friends or family or whoever, it's really easy. It's literally just a link. You just email or text them and they can just pop it up on their phone or computer and away they go. So it's really cool. But we'll get into this. We'll get into Figma later. I just want to get to the bare bones of it. I don't want to get into like the weeds of how to use another tool, because really at this point, I don't want to teach you guys Figma too much, but it does enough of the basics that I can cover those relatively simplistically. And really the only thing you need to worry about is just creating the art, which you're more than welcome to do again in Photoshop. And I would actually recommend doing it there. But again, we'll get to that when we get there. So again, you can do things like, you can interact. We're not using Notion or Dropbox, you don't need to worry there. There's third party, good to know they support them, but again, we probably don't really care about that. You can create presentations, which is cool. I'll show you that later when we get there. It basically just blacks out the screen and the only thing you see is that device. So if it's a phone or a tablet, you just see the outline of that device, and then everything else is black, which looks really cool if you're presenting it to like, a share screen like this, for example. And then obviously you can even see how people used it and stuff like that. I don't know if you can actually do this with the free version, but I know you can use it in the advanced versions as well. So I'll show this out too. And like I said, we'll get into Figma gradually as we go along. But for now, before I go into the next little bits, is there any questions around anything that I mentioned so far with research or, any of that kind of stuff? Oh, so it's getting dark, so I should turn on my light.
This is super random, but do you ever I don't know, I really love the GIFs, like the dancing icons, and like I really want to incorporate it in my designs. How often do you use it personally, like within your work practice?
Like actually doing them within samples and showing them to people and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Not very often, to be honest. I probably do them very, very, very little, because it's just the audience that I'm doing it for doesn't need it. I mean, for my day job, it's medical, right? So they don't care about any of that stuff. They just all they care about is seeing shit on the screen, and they want to see a lot of it. So my job is to actually tell them how not doing that is actually better for them, because seeing a bunch of shit on your screen really dense isn't actually good for you. So it's actually explaining to them reverse and saying, actually, if you do it this way, it's better. For other work, like for my work with Accenture and for some of those kind of people, they'll probably like that stuff a little bit more, because the stakeholders are different. Generally, they're more like internal, they're business people, or they're like analysts and stuff like that. So they'll like those little quality of life things. I think where you'll do this a lot is for smaller independent clients, like a small business or even a big business, but like a more local sized business, right? They're like, okay, I want to redo like my website, or I want to do like a new app or something. I think there, for that use case, they will like to see that a lot, because anytime anything's moving or animated, it just feels much more lively. And it does create that greater sense of like, oh, like this is even like a bar, like a progress bar leveling up a little bit, like that makes people excited. They're like, oh, cool, you can do that, awesome. Or like a transition from one screen to the next, like where you click a button, kind of like this one here with this modal, right? It's just literally an overlay, a colored overlay with this thing that pops up. Super simple, but people like that. They're like, oh, cool. It feels like an actual, app, stuff like that. Really easy to do, not that difficult, doesn't take a lot of time, and your response from a customer or a client will be, pretty good.
I find it's like you're able to kind of, if you're doing a presentation per se, and I guess in our situations with dealing with clients, we would be doing presentations. So whether it's virtual, whether it's not, then I guess in this case, right, like the graphics are able to speak for themselves and you're just able to talk, right? It's not like you're like pointing, like it's like these annoying, like kind of really old style kind of like PowerPoint situations where like you're trying to find the image and find the text and blah, blah, blah. Like it's just super confusing. And so I don't know, are we able to like go over this maybe a little bit and see how if we can do it, and like any of that, is that incorporated in any of like the outline?
Yeah. So the prototype section that I mentioned earlier kind of is basically that. Like we'll take some time and be like, okay, it's kind of a different mindset of thinking about like creating the pieces. But once you have the pieces, just like this GIF here where they're showing you that you're connecting it together and then that thing pops up, it's exactly that. It's basically thinking in your head like, okay, what are the things that need to move and what those things are, and then creating those pieces properly, and then it's just hooking it all together. That's all it really is. So yeah, if it's a pop-up, an overlay, something sliding over something, like all of that stuff, the software actually does a lot of that for you, like the animation pieces. Again, you're only really building out the actual independent like Lego pieces more or less, and then the system kind of puts it together for you. But we'll go over that and to think like, okay, if you want to do this, you need to break this piece out, right? This needs to be a separate piece of art. This needs to be a piece of art, and then you can combine them in the software, stuff like that. Even if you use a different software, I'll show you a couple different prototype tools. This is just Figma, but there's like Marvell, there's InVision. They all do somewhat the same thing. Some of them you might find easier to use. Some of them are a little bit more convoluted. But nonetheless, they all pretty much do the same thing. They all let you create stuff, link it together, and then showcase it to a client pretty quickly. How specialist you want to get with that in terms of animation and like how much you want things to move around is how much work you want to put into it, basically. But yeah, for something that's pretty simple, like you said, like getting away from PowerPoints and like having an 80-page slide PowerPoint of like, okay, this, if you click this and then it goes to this, then this, they can just do it themselves. You just give them the link and you say, here's, just click through, and then they can actually just pretend like it's a real thing and be like, oh, cool, this actually moves, even though it's just actual still images with no coding. It's not an actual thing. That's what we'll do.
Because I find like, obviously, like you said, depending on your audience, right? If someone's old, like they're going to take more time to go through it or watch it or whatever. And if someone's young, they're flipping through that shit like no tomorrow. So it's like, it depends on who you're obviously marketing to and who you're dealing with. But like, I think this is super cool.
Well, that's where you get to see like, does that work, right? Because like you just said, somebody older might take a little bit more time. You'd be like, okay, somebody younger, they're used to those patterns. They understand what to work for because they've been indoctrinated into those UX patterns mentally. They already know this means this means that. Somebody who's older, not as native digitally, won't understand those lexicons, those iconographies, those methods. But the more you can like do that, and depending on who you're aiming it for, you can make that easier or not so easy depending on what it is. But yeah, prototyping is a great way to test and say like, okay, I'm going to test somebody a little older. Do they get it? Yeah, some of them actually do. And sometimes I think for the most part, anyone who's our age or even younger, I don't think they usually have any problem, but sometimes they give you interesting input of like, hey, I would rather see this here, or I would like to see this, or how come you don't do that? And those are the kind of feedbacks that you kind of want. But yeah, we'll go over that. I do want to get you guys to actually have a somewhat of a prototype, even if the art isn't final, just to have the ability to actually click something and move it and have things have interactions. That's the level I want to get you to at least at some point. And then later at the end, when you guys are done your final art, what I want you to do is then put that final art back into the prototype and say, here's my quote unquote final prototype, all the final art, all the final copy, and then go out and test it with people. And hopefully that's what you will show in your portfolio as well, and say like, I've made this UX experience, tested it with people, here's the notes, here's the feedback. That's the kind of stuff they look for in those portfolios. So yeah, so we'll get into prototyping right now. Again, like I said, the next couple classes a little bit more just general, and we're just going to revisit some topics that we've kind of covered a little bit more previously. So if we're looking at some of this stuff outside of Figma here, so the next one is again user personas. I want to go over these really quickly, and actually what I'll do is let me stop sharing for 1 sec, and I will actually share with you guys. Let me just find it. Give me 1 minute here. Okay. Where is it? Here we go. Perfect. Let me share my screen. Okay. So I'll do this. So what I'll actually show you guys is personas that we have at my work. So if you remember, we sort of did these before. You guys kind of had them as well. So with personas, basically, see if I can make this a little bit bigger. There you go. So these are the ones I not that I did, but these are the ones that we have for our workplace. They're not fancy by any means. They're very no nonsense, very just like, basic. The main idea behind ours is we have multiple personas. So similarly, in this first assignment, I am asking you to create at least 2. And depending on what product it is that you're doing, think around who that persona is and how they necessarily use it. So for example, the personas we have for my work, because we deal with audiology, there's multiple roles within audiology. Typically you have the actual audiologist, which is this guy, Brad. Again, these are all hypothetical, not real people, but we're basing them on actual things that they would do. So our quadrants or our sections that we break down are things like demographic info, which is just high level, like, he's 32, he's a guy, he went to medical school, whatever, doesn't matter where he went, he's pretty good with tech, he knows his stuff. He's pretty good with business too, so he's up there, he's not like a junior. His values, so this is important relating to our platform because we deal with what is important for people. So for him, he cares about people, he cares about patients' well-being, he cares about driving sales and having good data, he cares about continuing the education of his staff and himself, he cares about patient retention, and he cares about his community where he lives and who he serves, right? All pretty, reasonable stuff. Roles and responsibilities. So what does he actually do? He performs the tests and he enters the test results. He does treatment recommendations. He does fitting for the hearing aids. He does cleanings and tunings and adjustments and all that stuff. He actually helps drive the sales. So he might suggest it or someone else, whatever. He refers patients to particular doctors and specialists, physicians that deal with specific issues. He tries to stay ahead of industry news and continuing education. So he's probably active on the web. He reads articles, watches videos, all that stuff. And of course, he's also on top of patient satisfaction. So this is things like surveys, follow-ups, phone calls, receiving visits, et cetera, et cetera. His pain points, again, the other big section is insurance. Because again, running a medical clinic and dealing with multiple insurance providers is always a pain in the ass. Excessive data entry and business process noise. So he doesn't like to have to put in a lot of stuff in the computer. It's kind of time consuming. Lack of patient data, so no history. So again, maybe this patient went to another clinic and that clinic, burned to the ground and just all their shit got burned and there's no data, right? So it's really hard to make a suggestion there. Not knowing sales and performance trends. So again, he can't accurately gauge how his company's doing or how his business is doing. His fear of failure, of not satisfying his patients, which is actually a pretty big one and a real fear that a lot of people have. Changing market and competitive pricing. So again, very real thing that occurs. And patients not following through with recommendations, which to be fair is also out of his control, but he can do steps to keep that in mind. If we go through the next ones, Allison's the next audiologist. So she, like Brad, is different. She's a little older. Again, medium business savviness, medium tech savviness. Again, similar values, similar responsibilities, similar pain points as well. So again, they both do pretty much the same job. So it makes sense that they would have similar things. This other person, Josie, she's the patient care coordinator. So she's, again, different person. She greets people, so she's got different responsibilities. She does the digitization of documents and notes and stuff like that. So her pain points and frustrations are different because she's all about like people showing up, doing their stuff, getting forms in. So for her, it's like, I don't want to deal with paperwork. I don't want to deal with bad data. I don't want to deal with deliveries. I don't want to deal with too many workflows and business tools. I don't want to juggle tasks, and I don't want to do, slowness of tools. I want things to be fast, precise, clean data, and on time, right? That's what she'd like to have. Mike is the owner. Again, in the world of audiology and I guess medical as a whole, not everyone who's the owner actually practices. So similarly, if you go to your dentist or optometrist and it's a small clinic, they might own the clinic, but they might not be the doctor actually prescribing or doing the treatments. They might just be the owner, right? They could own a chain of them, for example. If you go to like, Hakim optometry, they do tests, but the guy who owns it is probably not an actual optometrist. I think he's just a business person, but he would be considered, quote unquote, the practice owner. So same thing, right? This guy, Mike, he's going to have different pain points. His is more about like money, financials, patients. He still cares about them, but he's more about the culture. He's more about making sure his staff's on time, hiring and laying off people, payroll, bringing in more customers, trends, renting, furniture, like way different pain points than the other two because he's got a different thing to consider. So the main point I'm trying to show you is that personas will have very wild different things that they want to do and need to accomplish. So think about that really, really heavily when you create your own personas. Don't just lump them in and say, okay, this person's doing this person's doing that at the end. Really think about how they interact with the product or service or whatever it is that you want to design, how they're going to interact with that. I would almost recommend that of the two personas, one is the person who like runs it, who runs the software, actually like, creates stuff for it. And the other side is a customer, the actual person using it, because they're going to have very different needs. They're going to have different stuff, and they do tie in together. So think a little bit about that. Again, just for reference, the rest of these are quite different. Again, all these blurbs are fairly, high level: values, demographic info, roles and responsibility, pain points. Pain points is probably the most important one here. Then I would say roles and responsibility, and then values and demographic info are not that important because they're just like whatever, but roles and responsibilities and pain points are like definitely super important. Like those are the things, at least in our case here, are the ones you want to kind of have, because we want to know, number one, who's this person and what is their job? And number two, what things do they not like about their job, so that we can make the software better so that it helps them, right, with their thing. And you'll notice a lot of them could have overlapping problems, right? They don't all have to be exclusive to say like, oh, only this person can have this problem, no one else can have it. Like insurance is a problem that almost all of them have, right? Like, right, if you look at Allison, she has insurance. If you look at Brad, he's got insurance. And you go back down to Harold, he's also got insurance, right? So 3 of the 6 or 5 of these guys have the same problem. Again, bad business processes, poor communication, not clean data. The point of these is you start to see a trend of things that become similar over time because there's so many. The other thing to note is these are not based on real people. Their problems and things are based on actual feedback that we got from actual real people. We just distilled it down into 6 fictional characters and said, hey, if we actually think of them this way, here's what we think our customers are having problems with based on all the feedback that they've given us and so on. For you guys, because you don't actually have customers and you're doing a hypothetical, you can still think about it. You have to put yourself in their shoes and be like, if I was using this, what would I actually want? What do I want as a user, as a customer, as somebody using this, not the one creating it, but using it? What would I want to get out of this? What are the things that I'd like to see? What are the things that would bug or irk me currently that I could help, kind of fix? You're playing 2 roles because on one hand, you're creating the solution to the problem, but you're also creating the problem at the same time. So it's a bit confusing, but essentially that's what you're doing, is you're doing both halves, right? You're trying to put yourself in both shoes, which I'll admit is difficult because you have to be very unbiased. You can't lean in and say like, oh, I can fix my own problem because I know what I'm doing. You have to look at it very subjectively and say, okay, I have to pretend I'm another person who doesn't have the insight that I have, and look at it holistically and say, what are the issues that they might have and what could I do to fix them, from those angles. So that's it here. Again, these are not the most crazy ones you can see. I'll stop sharing for 1 sec and then I will reshare because I don't think this likes when I scroll my screen. So yeah, for our user personas, and I shared this document with you guys quite a while ago in term 1. I'll skip right to the main points. So again, when you guys are doing these ones here, you can kind of see basically like, think through that kind of stuff, like really think through and say, okay, who is this person? Maybe, personality might be important for you. The examples I showed you for my work, we don't really care about that stuff as much because like their values, for example, they're important, but really we care more about like who they are, what they're doing. In your examples, maybe the values and responsibilities and stuff like that may not be as much. Maybe because they're not the same thing, you kind of have to think about like, what do you think is more important? I still think things like goals and frustrations are still very, very important. You still want to really think about, if a person's using my product, what do they want to get out of this and what might piss them off, or what does piss them off that they're looking for a solution, right? How might they get that, right? And etc. So again, if you're thinking about a travel thing, you're saying, okay, my app idea is I want to do a better comprehensive travel guide to certain areas in the world, right? Like how do I solve for those problems? You probably think, well, what are the main problems people have? It's probably like, okay, they don't know where to go. They don't know how much things cost, right? I can give you a good hypothetical, for example. I would say if I was in your shoes creating this assignment, I would want to do like an expat assignment, right? I would say, I'm Canadian, but I want to move to Europe and I want to live there. How much is it going to cost me to live there? What is the cost of average items like grocery items? How much does it cost to rent in different districts of a certain city? How much is transportation going to cost me? What kind of industries does this city or this country have for my kind of work? What's the crime rate look like? And if you have multiple personas with that in mind, one persona might be, a family, might be like an older married couple. Maybe they're looking to retire, so they're going to have different needs. Another one might be a young couple or a young guy or a young girl looking to go work and explore the world. They're going to have different needs, right? So if you think about it in those kind of ways, the personas then become much more easier to like visualize. So yeah, again, it all will come down to what your project is going to eventually be and what do you think you want to do. That will help inform the pain points and the goals and all the other stuff that your personas will eventually be. But again, if we look through them, very similar to what you did before, you want to have some sort of idea of like some blurbs. I would research again, look at some other persona examples outside of the ones here that I'm showing you. Find one that you think works. And again, think about your project, think about what you want to do, and then translate that into that and say, okay, here's the thing, here's I think what they want, here's I think what they're going to have trouble with, etc. And so on. So that's pretty much it. Again, some of these might be more writing with them. Some of them might be less. Maybe you want to focus more on the bio and you really want to do them. The big difference between these ones and the previous ones that we talked about, or the ones that we even looked at, is the fact that these are more final projects, right? So think about these as being presented as part of your final portfolio piece. This assignment is not just like an assignment. Again, it's something you're probably going to demo to prospective, people looking to hire you. So the better it looks, take the time, make it look nice, add in the right stuff, can be simple, doesn't need to be too complicated, but again, having those right things there and being able to tie into the narrative and say, listen, here are my personas, here's my work, here's my designs, and having that all tie together will make you have a really nice, powerful portfolio that people will definitely want to see more of, and you will definitely have those interviews happen. So, so that's it for these ones. Again, we talked about these before. I believe you guys still have these lecture slides. If you don't, I can save them out again for you and put them in Moodle. Otherwise, refer back to them, and I will send out that link that I shared before as well. The research one, you can look into that too. The other thing that we'll probably look into is a little bit around journey mapping as well. We're not going to get into that as specifically, but think around like what what somebody might go through, what are the steps that they might have, and so on. And that's basically it. So that's about all. We're a little earlier. Usually I go till 8, but we're quarter to 8, so it's fine. Why don't we call it wraps for now for a break? Unless you guys have any questions before I let you guys go for a bit. If not, let's go for half an hour as usual. Let's come back quarter after. And then when we come back, I'll go over the assignment with you guys, which kind of already did, but we'll go over it more in detail. And then I'll give you guys class time to work on that and as well ask any further questions.
Question.
Yes.
Well, I don't know if it's a question, maybe it's just for everyone actually, but like, do you guys think that mapping would help us with our final project in Rod's class with Wix? I don't know. I feel like it would help. So I'm down to like go into that too. Yeah. I feel like that would be super beneficial for that class as well. I feel like that like web technologies and UX UI are kind of a little bit linked, but you guys actually do talk about very separate things, but like it's very linked for sure. I don't know if anyone agrees, but just a thought.
It did actually occur to me. I was like, well, are we going to do an e-commerce thing for this as well? And is this the same project? But then I think I realized that maybe there are some differences and things that we can do. Like if you like apps and stuff could be a lot different. Like you could do something like Headspace or like yoga apps. I don't know why all of the Zen stuff is coming to mind, but maybe that's where I'm gonna go with my project. Yeah. So am I getting that right? Because I think that's something I wanted to clarify, but I know we were going to talk about the assignment later too. So if I'm asking too quickly.
No. I mean, I guess if I'm understanding correctly, for this first assignment, it's just personas for you guys. So it's just two or three, give or take. In terms of like web tech and like user mapping stuff to that, yeah, by all means, like I said, I'm keeping the final assignment, like the overall big project that you're doing for this term is quite open-ended. I'm not requiring you to do a specific thing. It's up to you entirely. So if you do want to do an e-commerce thing, or if you want to relate it to an assignment in Rod's class or Layla's class, you're more than welcome. I don't want to make you guys feel like you have to do other work just for the sake of doing work, but I also want to make sure that you're doing something that you will enjoy doing and not just feel like it's work for work's sake. So hopefully that kind of answers that a little bit.
It's going to require more thought.
No, all good. Like I said, it's a bit tricky because this is kind of like I'm trying to set you up and think like, okay, there's the assignment, which is to come up with the personas for this bit. But really, the first thing you should probably actually think about before you even get into that is what do you actually want to make long term? Basically, the final assignment is just a series of screens, kind of like a mini app / website that has different features, different pages, things you can click, actual interactions. So like things you click on, you might have a pop-up or a drop-down, a couple things like that. How detailed or how much of a rabbit hole you want to go down with that, I'll leave in your hands. I'm not setting a minimum or maximum requirement. I'm not going to tell you you must do 2 drop downs, you must do 1 modal, you must do 1 overlay. All of those elements are things you can decide on for yourselves. Is what do you think is the best UX? So to give you a better example of clarity, the previous term when I did this bulk assignment was I asked students to come up with a project of their own. One guy came up with like a plant app where he said, I want to do an app where like I can take care of it. And he kind of gamified taking care of house plants, basically, where you take a photo of it, you can like name it, and then it becomes like a little 3D avatar, and you can dress it up. You can give it sunglasses or a hat or whatever, and you have different plant types, and you can also learn more about it. So he had a section in the app where you clicked on it and it would be like more info, and it told you like what kind of plant it was, how long it lives, what kind of stuff does it need, etc. Another girl, she did like a food delivery app, so kind of like Uber or like whatever, Skip to Dishes, but she did it for like small mom and pop shops instead, which is kind of the same thing, but she made her own logo, her own branding, and then she's like, okay, I want to, do this whole flow around like if I order something, I see all these menu options, I can click, I want, ginger beef with rice and blah blah blah, and then I put it together and it costs this much, and then I can see when the guy's coming. So very similar to like other delivery apps, but she put her own spin on it. Another person did a like a flower slash like plant store where she bought like bouquets and stuff, and you can like buy your own plants. She did delivery, so all her screens were around like ordering, so you can do bundles and occasions. Like I helped her and I said like think around like you have anniversaries and birthdays and whatever, like you have those different pages, you might have bundles and packages, and like what does that look like. So she actually designed all those screens and put them together. So that's basically kind of what this final assignment's going to be. The personas just relate to that. It's just what are the people looking to do, where they might have trouble with. So when those students did this assignment, they basically created personas like the girl with the flower shop. She just did like, customers are having a hard time finding topical flowers that match the occasion that they need, or there's too many choices, they don't know where to go, or they want something close to their office so they don't have to commute too far and they can do it. They want to be able to do it remotely or quickly online. The guy that did the little houseplant app thing, his personas were around like people that are into games and like gamification, but they're kind of introverted, so they don't really go outside, they don't have like a lot of friends, so maybe this is a way for them to be more social or have some sort of connection. The other person who did the food delivery, hers was all around like business owners looking to maximize profits, gain new customers in their neighborhood who might not have ordered from them otherwise, stuff like that. Does that help a little bit in context?
Follow-up question.
Yes.
Apps that move, so like ideally if you were like looking at an app on your phone, you would want it to like move, and obviously it's not really possible. I don't know if we're at that level or not, but like what am I trying to say, basically the projects that we've already done, I want to make them like animated, right? Like I want to make them like move and stuff. So that's obviously like not this project or like final project, but like would those graphics that are movable be considered animation?
If I'm understanding you correctly, I think yes. When we say moving, it's basically you're just talking about interaction, right? Like you click something, something pops up, or you click a link, it takes you to another page, and you actually see that like transition, right? That actual movement, just like you do on your phone now. You go to a website, you click on a button or something, it takes you to like a new page or something pops up. Like those little elements, yes, we'll be able to do those before. You can even go back retroactively if you want to your old assignments based on what I teach you guys with these tools, and actually make that stuff move too if you want. Now the level of movement is going to be up to you in terms of like, if you're thinking like, yeah, I'm going to have a bar that like moves and like levels up, probably not that level, but like clicking something and having something pop up, or like half a screen, or like an overlay, or like a drop down, making it kind of feel like a real thing. Yeah, we can definitely do that. That's not too bad.
I'm finding I'm like trying to like put the work that we've done in this class like in, sorry guys, in like mock-ups, like actual phone mock-ups, to like see what it looks like and see what I should, just basically testing it and seeing how it looks. And I find that like obviously I did mine like super long, so like is there a way to have like a still of an iPhone, but then like when you look at it be able to scroll?
Yeah, so that long image that you have, when you put those long images into these tools like Figma or InVision or whatever, they just scroll. They actually just scroll like a real phone. That's
Okay.
the whole point, is you make them really long, so then it knows like, oh, this is just the thing, and it just actually keeps going the whole length. You only see the border of the actual phone screen, so whatever that height is, but as you scroll up, the content will just kind of follow, and just like it would in reality. And yeah, the whole idea here is that what we're going to do is eventually get into the nitty gritty of like, okay, I want this thing to be a drop down. I want this thing to be a whatever button or whatever interaction you want it to be. Those are the things we'll figure out. it's like basically like when you go online, you're like, oh, I'm looking for a coat, and you're like, okay, I see the coat, and you have a button that's like color options, and you click it down, and it shows you like blue, red, brown, black, white, whatever, like that stuff. That's what you're going to see, right? And then if you click it again, you say, okay, I have a brown jacket. I click red, the color changes, right? Like that stuff is what we're basically going to do in the prototyping up until the final. Basically, that's what we're going to get to, more or less.
Sick. Cool.
Yeah, it's not, it sounds harder. Really, all it is just kind of cutting everything up right and having all those pieces ready and then putting it all together. That's basically what it is. It's not actually, you're not really creating that many more pieces of like mock-ups or screens. You're really only doing little things. What I'll do when we get to that point in the next couple of weeks is I'll show you how to actually set up like your scene, like to those screens, to be like, okay, this is screen one. The next interaction should be this thing, which is now this, and then the third one should look like this, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, the biggest thing that will help you up front now, I think, is keeping your files really, really, really clean, making it really easy to access like groups and folders and stuff like that. The more modular you make everything, the easier it will be to change it really quickly on the fly, like colors or like effects and stuff like that. If everything's unscattered on different layers and it's kind of messy, it'll take you longer to do this. But if you set everything up nicely and you just like, you can like turn things off and on, you can export out those files super quick, throw them into like InVision or Figma, set up all the hotspots properly, and then basically prototype the whole thing in like half an hour. I might even show you an example or two of like just what I do with like work stuff, like more simple ones, and it'll give you the idea of like what that stuff looks like. But for now, yeah, just think through like what your, I guess, concept should be, because that's probably going to be the biggest thing to think through. And then everything else we can figure out as we go along. Shouldn't be too bad. Cool. All right. Well, since we took a bit more time, it's all good. Sorry, some question, someone?
It wasn't a question. It was just that would be super helpful to see like how you would do something. I know like maybe something simpler so it doesn't take as much time, but to see you like prototype it in like half hour just to like watch how you do it, for me, I think would be really helpful.
Yep, for sure. That's going to be definitely a part of that stuff. Is we'll be able to see. I'll show you guys a nice, like, good proper thing where you can see like the steps of like, this is how many screens you need, number one, and number two, like what do those things kind of look like? Because when you're doing prototyping, it's a lot of copy pasting and you're just changing like one or two small things really, and then the rest of it kind of stays the same. But yeah, it'll make more sense when I show you. I think it'll click a lot more, and then when you actually learn the tool as well, I think it'll come together really quickly for everyone, and you guys will get a good hold of it. So
Dope.
awesome, cool. Why don't we went a little over? So why don't we push back our time then? So it's almost 8 now. It's a couple minutes too. So why don't we come back at 8:30 then? And then when we come back, again, go over the assignment real quick, and then we can have any further discussions and questions and all that good stuff. All right, I'll see you guys back here soon. Yep.
How many classes are you teaching? Both cohorts this semester.
It's just you guys and one other group that I'm doing on Friday afternoon. So 5 to 8 or 5:30 to 8:30 on the Friday. So that's not too bad. I think
Nice.
it's a bigger number of people though. So you guys are only obviously three, but I think there's like 8 to 10 in the other group. And I have no idea what their background or anything is on them.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
I guess we
Uh,
lucked out getting like such a small class compared to like every other, well, like Layla and Rod, speaking of like the previous cohort and stuff, like it's quite cool.
No, I mean, yeah, for sure. I think it's great. Like, I love this size with you guys because we get to be really like much closer and intimate, and we can ask a lot more questions and just like tangent on stuff a lot more. With
Yeah.
the previous group, I had to be a lot more careful around that stuff. And I'm not sure if Layla or Rod mentioned it, we had like one or two students who were just really abusive towards everybody. Like she was just bad to not only instructors, but to other students too, just super disrespectful and like consistently just like, and surprisingly, she was also not a young student. Like, if she was like super young, like 18, whatever, I'd be like, okay, it's just, they're getting through that phase. But this was like somebody like in their 50s, and she was just super, super, super like aggressive and just did not like to, like, didn't want to conform to like what was being said, didn't agree with things, and just was generally like a headache to deal with. And the rest of the students were pretty good. I mean, there's obviously always going to be people that are really engaged, people that are not engaged, and then everything in between that. But this person was like one of the oddballs that would just consist, and then just like tangent on the randomest things. Like for her project, she had done something around traditional Chinese medicine, and she wanted to do an entire app around categorizing it, which I was like, that's great. Like, yeah, totally. Let's do that. And she's like, oh well, I want to do this whole thing around like the traditional Chinese medicine, but then I also want to do like classes and like, where people can teach about it. I was like, okay. I'm like, what are these? Are these like web seminars? And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay. And then she's like, oh, but I also want to do like a store where you can buy them. I'm like, okay. And like, there are multiple stores? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, okay. Do you know where they're going to, like, how you would get to them? And she's like, oh, there's going to be like a map and you can like do it. So like just kept ballooning the project. And I'm like, you do realize like this is like a lot of work for one person in, I don't know, 6-ish weeks of time. And she's like, yeah, maybe I can like, trim it down. It just ended up being really messy and just really, 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 really out of it. Which everyone tried to scale her down, like keep it simple, keep it, yeah, not a good,
It's
not a
hard
good
though,
experience.
but it's like in that case, like as annoying as they are in class, because there's always one person that's like kind of just like on their own sketch, but like I find that like honestly they're doing themselves a disservice because like this industry is so cutthroat. Like if they can't handle critique in class, like they're gonna get chewed up and spit out so fast that like it's like, you know.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the thing. I mean, I didn't have to really go into that lecture with any of you because I feel like number one, you're all really understood it very well, and you're all quite respectful. Number one of not just me, but also each other, where there's this genuine support of like, okay, I see what you're doing, I see what you're trying to do. This is great. This could be better, and it's all meant in good intention. But I feel like with some of the other group, or at least that other group, there's a bit of that, and then there was definitely an element of like, I don't want to hear something that I don't want to hear, and I don't like that, and I want this. And it's like, that's fine. Design is very subjective. It's like music or food or whatever. Like, not everyone's going to like it. It's fine. At the end of the day, it's also not for you. Most of the time you're doing it for somebody else. They're paying you for this. That's your job. You don't have the ability to say like, well, I think it should be like this. You as a professional can definitely suggest it, but at the end of the day, if your client's like, nope, I want rainbow sparkles and I want this and I want that, then that's what you make them. You can advise against it and say, no, here's all the reasons why you shouldn't do it. And here's all the reasons, like all the data points I can give you for why that's stupid. But if they're like, no, I don't care, I want to do this, then you're like, okay, fine. But no, this one person just consistently like even the dumb, like even on Slack, I think that was where the point where it started to get very abusive, which was, it wasn't just me, but like Rod and Layla would chime in too. And we would have massive like paragraphs of sentences explaining in excruciating detail like what like this thing is. And sometimes like the question was very simple. It was like a very honest question, like, how do I do this effect in Photoshop? And it's like, okay, well, this. And then it's like, well, oh, I want to do this thing. It's like, well, did you mean this or this? And it's like, no, no. And it just kept diving into other stuff, and it kept completely tangent. And then by the end of it, it was like, oh, this thing offends me. And it's like, how did we get to this point? Had nothing to do with the original question, and just very confused. So yeah, not to harp on too long about one person, but yeah, like you said, there's those, one or two people that occasionally pop in. A very interesting story though, for sure. I mean, definitely a character I will not forget anytime soon. But yeah, definitely not an ideal circumstance, but I'll see what the new cohort is like. Excited to meet them this Friday. We'll see what it's all about. They basically go back to all the term one stuff. We'll do all the revisiting what you guys just went through. I'll see how they handle things, and then we'll continue on with stuff you guys are doing with getting into this bigger project and personas, and then getting into prototyping and actual detailed design and so on. So cool. All right, so now that we're all back, let me actually go over and I'll show you really quickly. It's not an actual prototype, but I'll show you kind of like a lo-fi mock that I did quite some time ago. So this one is one I did for ADP like way back when I used to work for them, like 5 or 6 years ago. This is a lo-fi mock-up, so it's not final, it's not like polished, it's just quickly done. And basically what I did was, this was more just to showcase like how first of all, this is just to see how many screens actually exist. So this is what you would consider the flow, right? This is all the flow that you can do. And just to back it up even further, to give some context, so this makes some sense. Obviously, ADP is the payroll company. They do a lot of financial stuff, payroll, HR, all those kind of services. So one of the things that they have is they have this platform called Workforce Now, which is like one of their big platform things. They still do it now, it still exists. But one of the concepts I had was, why don't we like mobilize this, right? Because they're very legacy based. A lot of their stuff is very old school, very desktop heavy. And, we noticed obviously with good intentions, and most people are now on their phone, tablet, whatever. And one of the things we wanted to do was actually take the desktop version and make it into a mobile app in a responsive format. So this section that I'm showing you is what's the employee directory. And this is basically like adding a new employee flow, seeing employee flow, and so on. So when you're thinking of like those prototypes, and like we're going to get into this stage, like this is what I'll actually ask you to do at some point, is to like mock up like in low fidelity what some of these screens are going to look like. So this is like the generic, add employee screen, or like the directory screen. Everything's in alphabetical order, so it goes from A to Z, Z to A. You have their last name, first name, because typically that's how they do it. You see their little avatar if they have a picture. If there's no picture, you see initials of them. And then also you see if they're salaried or hourly wage, because some people are, some people aren't. And then you have a more menu here. So for example, all these little yellow things are indicating like, if I click this button, this menu should pop up, and I should be able to sort it by first name, last name, if they're active, meaning they're employed, or they're inactive, which could mean they're on maternity leave, they're on vacation, they're laid off, they're contractual, whatever. That's all there. Or you can, cancel, close it. If you want to add a new employee, you have the plus up here, or you have the big button here at the bottom. If you do that, you see this screen kind of pop over. It takes you into a stepper, as you can see here, because it's step 1 of 2, personal details. This would scroll, so you'd see more stuff: first name, last name, address, SIN. Since this is an actual, HR application, it's okay to ask for things like SIN. Typically, you don't ask for like social insurance number or any super private information, but because this is for payroll, you generally do. Second step would be, once you complete this, it's like taxes and stuff, or more like payroll details. So like salary, hours, tax credits, whatever. I forget all the different things here, and you can pick and choose what they are. And then the last step is sort of the review, which is where you see everything sort of kind of abbreviated. You see their address, SIN, birthday, name, financial detail stuff. So how many hours, what kind of work they do, and then you save it. And then you get a pop-up at the top that says, hey, you saved this person. here are all the other things you can do, which is like earnings and deductions, policies, direct deposit, etc. All, boring stuff. But as you go down, you can kind of see like there's all these other options. So like if I click like, more option, like what do I see here? Well, I can view details, I can add deductions, add earnings, make payment, I can terminate them. If I terminate them, what does it look like? So basically everything you can do is kind of more or less designed out. So for when you guys do your final or start to do your prototyping and start to get into the bulk of this project, this big project, that's what you're going to have to think through is like, what do these screens look like? How many of these do you have? How granular in detail do you want to go? For things like this, like where you have like a list of people, for example, like, yeah, do you want to show the screen what it looks like to edit their details? Do you want to show what it looks like to do adding stuff? Is that a pop-up? Is it a whatever? Now, this one, I don't have every single option because it'd be quite extensive. And this was just a quick proof of concept, but you get the idea. Basically, you would see all these subsequent screens for each of these options within a design. The next step after this is once you've laid this out, is you take these designs and you put them into something like Figma or InVision. That's when you start creating your hotspots. That's where you get your animations and your transitions and all that pop-up stuff, because you've already done the design at this stage. Like all these things, the pop-ups, the buttons, the options, you figured all that out, you've designed them. They don't need to be pretty, by the way. They can just be rough like this. They don't need to be finalized. You put them into the software, you get that prototype, and that's how you test it. That's how you test your UX, basically. Does this work? Does this even make sense? Is this too tedious? Is this arduous? Does someone understand it? Et cetera. So does it feel intuitive? So on. Yeah, Lee, what can I, question, comment?
Yeah. I just, in regards to doing this, I think my concept or my idea that I'm playing with is making something that's accessible to people who are visually impaired, who are professionals. So in regards to this, it would be less word interactive and more audio interactive, right? So should I go that route or should I look at something a little simpler?
I mean, that's a really interesting idea, and I don't want to say no because I'm trying to encourage creativity and outside the boxness. I would say you could still do it. You still present it as a visual thing, and you still say
Okay.
like, okay, somebody who's a visual impairment might not see this design, but I mean, somebody has to see something at some point because they're still making it, so they still need to be able to do things. For yours, I think what you could do is you could look at a lot of other applications that deal with that, because there's quite a few that deal with things like that and have to deal with things like screen readers and so on. So the UI could be more simplistic. I think there still needs to be a UI, and you would have an element of something that speaks over it. If you actually ever use I think it's in the accessibility menu on like your iPhone or your Android device, you can actually go into it and they actually have this thing where it actually will read out like, left button, top of screen. And then
Yeah,
it's like,
I've heard some of the programs. Yeah, I have
yeah.
two friends who are visually impaired and they are massage therapists. And
Mm,
some of the stuff that's out there for them is just very hard to use because it wasn't made accessible, right? So
mhm.
I think one of the biggest challenges is scheduling patients for them, right?
Mhm.
And doing the intake forms and stuff like that, because
Mm,
they don't go back necessarily into the intake forms unless they really have to, right? And then easily accessing those notes they've made specific to a patient is challenging, right? So yeah, it's a whole different animal.
yeah, and I mean, and that's the thing is, right, like if they're visually impaired, they work for a clinic, they would still have people that are obviously not, and they would need to also access that sort of information. So it's kind of this system of like, how do we make something that has the extra capability to do stuff like that, but also still work for everyone else as well, to make it really inclusive, so no one's really left out and it doesn't feel, you know, not to say that it shouldn't be for both, because you definitely can do that. And I think even in my research of looking through some medical applications, like there's some that we've seen as well that kind of does some of that, but not really well. Like scheduling would be really interesting. And I know that from experience because I just dealt with that whole project a couple months ago, like maybe 5 or 6 months ago, around like recurrent scheduling or like double booking, triple booking, different locations, different time slots. How much time do you need before your appointment's over? And then like you have to clean and set up for the next patient. Like you need a buffer. What does that look like? Is there notes attached to that meeting document? Do there, all that kind of stuff. So you could do things like voice where you could say like, I'm going to have a design on the screen, like what you're seeing, and maybe there's a voice activated thing they could click or touch or even tap that would launch like a Siri or Google Assistant kind of a thing that would actually record verbally what they're saying and put it into this application via transcripted text or something like that. So it's a really interesting thing. I would say, yeah, definitely look into it, do some research, see what's available out there. There's some really cool third-party stuff I've seen. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to definitely look into it myself, but really cool and very useful thing for sure. And yeah, like you said, those pain points are really applicable, right? You're really very clear of like, this is the problems that they face. How can I solve it? What would be the design solution for that?
Okay, cool.
But yeah, so for the rest of this, it's pretty straightforward. I mean, again, when you guys do your layouts for this kind of stuff, it's not really about every single like walking through and having these arrows and clicking everything. Like you will just know, okay, when I click next, this screen pops up. Like you don't need to actually do these connection arrows this way. This is more for presentation sake, but basically this is what you're doing, right? Is like if you like do like any one of these things, like you wanted to show what it looks like if somebody clicked the date picker, you'd have that little drop down where you see the calendar pop up, right? That would be another screen. You would just copy paste this thing, move it over, and then have the design with the calendar, and then you kind of go back. Again, it sounds a little confusing right now, maybe harder to visualize in your head without actually seeing it. I'll go through and show you a nicer prototype example when we get there, but just go with me for now to assume that it's not too bad. Like I said, it's a lot of copy pasting with minor changes and stuff because you're either flipping to one or the other and then you're seeing a few differences of stuff, but it's basically what you're doing. You're just sort of showing stuff. Again, for the project, completely up to you how in-depth you want to get. In terms of in-depthness, I would say it's always a good rule of thumb to show the main actions of your platform. So show those big feature things, right? Like if you're adding something, you have a checkout screen, you have a payment section, like show those things. Don't just have a piece of text on the screen but never actually show the details of it. Have a design that actually showcases that stuff. Like again, for example, previous students that did that, they had they had some of that stuff. They actually showed all those different screens and so on. It wasn't a lot. I mean, in total, if we're actually counting how many individual like mock-ups are doing, some of them had like maybe less than 20. And that's not too bad. And again, most of them were just minor tweaks and changes. They're not all of them were completely redifferent. So even if that sounds kind of scary, it's not that bad, or if you really think about it into the detail. So we'll get into that more. But again, a lot of this stuff is just minor, and it depends how much you want to really get into it. But I wanted to just show you how you can get into some of that stuff. So for example, even things like settings, right? Like, so this is one I did for the settings page. So again, you have a little hamburger menu. You tap that, the menu pops up. In this case, you have a settings thing. You click it. You have all these things: language, notifications, payroll, earnings, whatever. You click payroll. You go to the payroll. You see a calendar. You click a date or a time or whatever. You go to the next one. Pretty simple. Here's kind of the overview of what the calendar thing looked like. Current date, selected date, weekends. Payroll, whatever. These are all just figuring things out. Did things like notifications, so what it would look like on your home screen, for example, roughly from this app. Again, pretty simple. This was like old iOS too. This was back, again, 5 or 6 years ago, so it wasn't as new as it is now. Pretty simple. Things like login screen too, like how do you log into this thing? Oh, you have user ID, password, go into this. Okay, cool. Some of it was pretty simple. We have dashboard, so like your main dashboard screen, for example. So how much you have on payroll, timesheets, and just differences of stuff. Like, so all these little things, like these are like the what if scenarios of like, well, what if you have an overage, or what if you have an error, or what if you like, I showed 1 or 2 designs of that too, because inevitably the point of this whole thing is that eventually someone's going to ask you, what does it look like when that happens? And if you don't have a design for it, it's really hard to kind of answer that. Again, you don't need it for every little thing, but the big things, errors, changes, adding things, purchasing, whatever you end up doing, what does that look like? You're probably going to have to, you know, think through that design a little bit. And again, the first pass we're going to do is probably going to look a lot like this. It's going to be pretty rough. It's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be super fine polished art. It's going to be quick, dirty stuff because we just want to see if the UX works. And then if the UX works, the flows work, it makes sense, things are in the right spot, then yeah. Chris?
Sorry, I hate doing that.
No, it's all, at least I can see it, because that's worse if I actually can't. It just keep going on for a while.
It's just annoying interrupting. Sorry, just a question. So to collect this information, you're obviously like reaching out to different departments to like input this information. So that would be like your research, right?
Correct, yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, just to clarify, the research component is not just solo. Generally, when you work with a company, you do reach out to other departments. So typically, with what I showed you earlier, with that big document that I showed you with all the comparative research, like I reached out to the product manager, right? They're the ones that usually write the requirements of what the thing should do. They're like the thinkers, or the sort of the pre-blueprint people, I guess, if you want to think about it that way. They sort of think of like, okay, here's what I want this thing to do, but they just write it down. They don't come up with the design. They don't know, like, they don't care about what color it is or how big it's supposed to be or how long something is. All they're thinking about is, what does this thing do? They write down the notes. I usually read those notes. I interpret them. I go off. I do my research. I usually ask them. I might have a meeting with them and say, okay, I've done this research. Here's my thoughts. Is this in the right direction of what you are thinking? Or is there anything you can glean from this that I might have missed? And when they chime in, they might say, oh, well, did you think about this? Did you think about that? What about this scenario? You know, I really like this thing, but we should think about that. So there's a lot of back and forth. Then I will go into actual designing. Then I'll start doing like rough, you know, kind of like this, maybe even more rough, and start sketching it out and being like, I think this is what it looks like. I think this is where this lives. I have a meeting with them, including other people in the team, maybe programmers or developer, say, okay, I think this is what I wanted to do. And I kind of run through what I'm doing here. I'm just showing you all these different screens. I'm saying, if I click here, it does this. This is the way it should look. This is the layout. And then people will say, yeah, I think this works. Yes, it makes sense. Or no, you know, the coding is really difficult. We need to break it up. Maybe it needs to be more screens, less screens. You can put this together, whatever, right? So it's very collaborative. It's not typically you're on your own for the most part. There's a lot of people you can go back to, ask questions, get additional information. They might have documentation for you to read. If you're working on a client, like you're freelancing, yeah, you're probably going to do more on your own, and you're going to have to rely more on yourself to be like, okay, here's the research that I did. I'm going to present this to my client with recommendations for designs based on what they're asking for, and giving them the why, right? Because that's the biggest thing with clients, is they need to understand why you're doing something, because they might not like your design. They might be like, I hate this design. But if you explain it to them and you say, actually, here's all the real good benefits that you're getting out of this design, a lot of the times you can win them over. And that's actually a lot more important than just subjectively saying, well, I like this color, I like this layout. That's fine, but really it's also about the usability and making sure that it accomplishes the end goals of you know, having those users accomplish, you know, whatever they need to, and so on. So that's it for this. I don't want to, you know, spend too much time on this. We'll get into you know, prototyping and wireframing and stuff a little bit more later on. But again, this was just to show you that like you can do a lot more stuff with stuff like this. I didn't do like the long scrolly stuff. This again was just really quick, dirty stuff, not meant to be a super detailed you know, mock-up or anything. But yeah, you can kind of see here like all the different ideas and layouts of like, you know, what happens, what does it look like, and so on. And a lot of it's just simple, it's just boxes and stuff. So it's not too complicated. Maybe some pie charts, donuts and stuff, and then so on. You can see all these payroll deductions and so on and so on. Again, different than what I'm doing now. It's also a mobile device. I'm not even thinking about all the different factors and stuff. And now looking back at this so many years later, there's a lot of other different designs I might have tried or thought of And then now the way the programming languages are done with things like HTML and CSS, like 3, you can do way more than what we could have done back then too. So that's a difference as well. So that being said, I'll kind of turn over to the assignment, just so that this way we can kind of get you guys rolling. I don't want to take too much time. We have just about half an hour left, so I want to give you guys some time to ask questions and think about stuff. But basically, the assignment, like I said, is this first part of the larger assignment, which is, again, your platform or app of choice, is to think about at least 2 users or 2 user personas for this thing that you're going to be creating. So Lee, like you said, you're trying to think of like maybe using these practitioners that are, hard of sight, wonderful persona, amazing, great persona use right there. A lot of pain points and frustrations you can get at, very clear goals and objectives. Awesome stuff right there. For the rest of you, again, think through what you were thinking of doing. Again, don't rush this, like take your time. We have lots of time here. I don't think there needs to be any sort of rush to get it. Just think through, again, what you really like, what you think makes sense, what you want to demo as a portfolio piece at the end of this, what makes sense to you. But also, keep in mind, have fun with it. Don't feel like this has to be something that's like, not pleasurable or something you have to grind through, because we're going to be doing this for a while. So, and these personas are not going to be something we just do and then throw away and never look at again. They are going to be referred to consistently as we move forward. The thought in the back of everyone's head should always be, what are my users? What are my personas? How would they react to what I'm designing? Does this make sense for them? Does this meet the objectives that they have, the goals that they have? Does this address the pain points that they have, etc.? So it's that kind of mindset that we're trying to get at here. But in terms of details, basically no less than 2. If you want to do 3 or 4, by all means, fantastic, great. You don't have to. If you just end up doing 2, that's totally fine. But basically, you think through, again, how these people are going to be using it, and so on. Consider use cases, functions that may exist or that you want to implement. There's no limits on how expansive you might want to make this app or project or product. It could be really complicated. It could be simple. I would say, obviously, aim for something realistic that makes sense to you within the skill level that you have. Definitely don't want to, constrain anyone in any sort of way, but also, again, keeping it real is also good. Again, think through, do you want to make it an app on a phone? Do you want to make it a website? Do you want to make it kind of a bit of both? Obviously, I wouldn't try to do both because it's a lot of work. So at this stage, think through, do I want this to be a phone app? Do I want this to be on a website? Knowing you could make it for a phone later down the road at some other future point, one or the other, doesn't really matter. Just know that that's what you're going to be working with moving forward. The actual requirements, though, for looking at this, it seems really lengthy. I just tried to be very descriptive. So again, if you look at the examples that I shared on Slack, those 2 slides that we saw in term 1 with the user personas and the journey maps, make them clean, make them look really nice, spend a little bit of time in Photoshop, make them look kind of, jazzy, whatever. Obviously include name, photo, basics, some sort of demographics, age, gender, location, maybe family likes, likes, dislikes, maybe location on adoption curve. So adoption curve being they're an innovator, early adapter, early majority person, late majority person, etc. You can look up further if you need to. What's their professional and personal background? Again, maybe their job. Again, company, whatever, could be fictional. These people don't need to be real people necessarily. What their leisure activities might be. Maybe a quote. Again, thinking through what exemplifies this person as a whole. What's something you can refer to them as. Quick sentence around them, summing them up. And then again, the second bullet point is just don't include yourself as this user. Again, we're trying to think very unbiased and very subjectively about this. So not trying to put yourself in someone's shoes directly as the user, but thinking around somebody completely other than yourself. I think you guys are really good at this already. Again, you can use any tools you want. I listed a couple here. I know we didn't really go over them. I talked about them in the first term a little bit, but I didn't actually teach you how to use them. I would say just do this in Photoshop, but if you do want to look into some of these other ones, you're welcome to. Things like Visio, Draw.io, SmartDraw, Illustrator, maybe, even though I know you guys are learning that with Rachel this term. There's Lucidchart, which is another program, but I, again, don't want to bombard you with a bunch of stuff. So I would say, in the interest of time and knowing that this is not the main focus of the overall big project, probably just do it in Photoshop. And then again, the last one's kind of just general, not really for this project, but overall, just think about all the different screens that you might be designing down the road. Again, keep in mind purpose, function, and overall use case. It's for 20%. So again, like I said, these numbers are going to be higher because we're only doing 3 assignments over the course of the next three and a bit months. So it will take a little bit more time, but it'll be worth more as well. And then again, this will be due at the start of week 3. So that gives us this week, next week, and then the week after it will be due then. We'll just do a quick presentation like we've always done, and then we'll get into the more other stuff there. Any questions around this one? It's pretty straightforward, but happy to answer if there's any confusion or need any clarity around anything. Cool. All right. Well, I'll also throw this in your folders. I know that I have not yet. I'll also put this on Slack, so you'll be able to find it in there. And then that's it. Yeah. For the rest, we got about, what I'm looking at here, half an hour. So yeah, next half an hour, welcome to think through ideas. If you want to spitball with me, or you just want to, kind of work on stuff, by all means, you're welcome to. Like I said, probably think platform or product or app first, then start thinking about your personas after, and start thinking about who that might be and how they might use it and so on. And then that should be it. And let me just save this out for you guys too.
Daniel, there's no set size for this, right?
So the actual ratios for it.
Template, yeah, like
Yeah, just like general like web. I forgot to include that, but yeah, just like your 1920, 1080 type size, like whatever, like widescreen type size, I think is good. Or like if you don't want to do like horizontal, you can do vertical, so you can do like paper size in 1/2 by 11 kind of, or whatever that translates into pixel size wise. You can just do something like that.
sweet.
Yeah, just to note, you're definitely not limited in I guess layout, so you don't feel you have to do it horizontal. I've seen ones done portrait. There's a whole bunch of different ones, so feel free to browse through, do some research, see what options there are out there. I've seen ones that look kind of like resumes, where it's like picture, text, 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 and then a bunch of text on the bottom. You can do that. That's more like a portraity one. I've seen landscapey ones that are like, again, one big picture on the side and then all the text on the other side. You can get pretty designy with it however you like, but again, no set things. Good rule of thumb is, yeah, just like 1080 by, or was it 1080 by 1020 or 1920 by 1080, and then the other ones, whatever the vertical size would be to that, the equivalent, something like that. It's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna have to admit, I don't even know how to begin to search for other apps that might be out there that would work for what I'm looking for.
So for yours, because you want to do kind of like vision impairment, I feel like there's no specific app that does that. I feel like it's a third-party add-on that will deal with something like that. Like it would be like a screen reader plus something that deals with that, I think.
Yeah, see the program that, well, right now they're both still in school and studying. So part of their curriculum is to have a practicum, obviously. So they use a program called Soap Notes,
Mhm.
which is through the school. And they're not very user friendly at all if you're visually impaired. Like she actually needed to hire me to input all of her client and patient information for school purposes. But what that particular platform provided was an option to add recordings instead of intake forms. So she could record her sessions with her patients and notes that she made, and we could just upload it that way. But what she was finding a challenge with was just physically scheduling these patients. And now she is hoping to open up her own practice fairly soon, like right after graduation. And so it's trying to get her to be a little more, I guess, organized where her patients are concerned. And so I don't even know how to, like, I don't even know how to search possibilities for that.
Yeah, it's kind of a complex one for sure because I'm not even aware of anything that exists. Like I'm sure there's bits of it, and it might be that too. I mean, we might come to the conclusion that there actually is no solution to this right now because nothing currently exists. It's just a hodgepodge of like individual little things that kind of do one or two things, but not everything. I don't know if I can think of any platform off the top of my head that allows for like, easy scheduling of patients when you're hard of seeing. I feel like they just sort of, the best they do is they're like, here's a shitty screen reader that might read out the UI and you can kind of long form do this, but it's not practical, right? It's not really made for somebody in that
Right.
specific instance. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's like an underserved market. Like that's probably a business opportunity waiting to happen where somebody would be like, yeah, I actually need to make something for this.
Yeah. So the program that they use, or that she uses anyways, is called the JAWS program, which is the one that reads everything out for you. And it's like insane. I always turn it off when I start her computer because when you can see, it's very annoying to have the computer read in the background like you're reading. But if you could also make it so that it interacts with that, then your audible portion of that would already be taken care of.
Yeah, that's a thing too, is you could definitely do something like that. I just shared a link with everyone in the chat, but it's more for you, Lee,
Yeah,
around something that I found.
awesome.
I mean, this is just one thing, right? It's just an app, but it's not specifically for medical stuff. I think it's just a general app that deals with it. I don't know if it's a screen reader or if it's a combination of that plus certain functions. I would almost think that like you almost could just say, you know what, I'm just going to design, like, I'm just going to take a traditional scheduling app, like something out of, Mind and Body or Jane or whatever scheduling app you want to use for, wellness. And then say, I'm going to combine it with more vision impairment feature sets that make more sense to somebody like that. Like, I don't know if that would just be like very large buttons with very high contrast colors, or is it more extreme to the point of like all that stuff's still there? There's still UI there, but there is like, yeah, voice commands that you can trigger that will do shortcuts or things like that. That have a combination of like, quick actions where you can do like, create new appointments, set up new appointment, take notes, schedule whatever, something like that. You can think of something like that, maybe. I mean, again, this thing doesn't need to actually work, right? We don't actually need to make it feasible. It's just something
Right.
that's sort of more or less there. So you can think about it that way too. That's probably the way I would approach it, is like taking a real world application and trying to make it more user friendly for somebody that is hard of seeing. and what would that entail? Like, what would that look like? And I would think it would probably be a hybrid of like the UI would be there, but you would have this functionality that adds on that is more useful for that. And maybe there's more of a readout. It's much more audio based. You know, reads out more things like it's more like a conversation, like a smart speaker would be like, okay, and, you know, if they're like, okay, I want to schedule an appointment. Okay, who's it for? This person. Okay, what happens if they don't find that person in the database? Create new patient, you know, blah, 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 blah. And you go through that process. It's something like that, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you.
Another question for you. So I'm thinking of doing like I've always wanted to start an agency. And so I'm thinking of, and not just having like one specific agency, but having like a creative agency where it just like employs all different types of people. And so you can basically just like download the app and you get all people's profile and you can just go on, and very similar to what is it?
Fiverr.
Fiverr, thank you. But just like more selective, and just, I guess, I don't know, a little bit more like professional and like elegant. I don't know if that's like too similar to like what we're doing.
No, I mean, you could definitely take like I would say like looking at Fiverr from my knowledge of it about a year ago, I looked into it, it's pretty messy. I mean, honestly, it's not a great
Yeah.
experience if I'm looking to hire someone, it's like it would kind of turn me off of using it. It's really messy. It's kind of like Amazon where like everything's on the screen. There's a lot of shit everywhere. It's not very clean. It's not very easy. I would maybe even one up you and say, think about, I like the idea of it a lot. And I would almost say, wouldn't it be cool if you had a platform that actually sort of centralized other agencies and you kind of had, yeah, kind of like an overall platform, like the Airbnb for agencies, if you want to think about it like that, right? Basically to
Yeah.
say, you know, what are the things you need to see? So in that case, I would think I would make a list of like, what are the things that matter to someone who's looking for an agency? If I'm looking to hire an agency, I probably want to know a couple things. Number one, I want to know where they're located. I want to know how much they cost, what kind of work they've done, how long it takes them typically to turn around certain types of work. You know, any awards or exempt or special things they've done. Whether they like what their pricing structure looks like. Is it like bulk? Is it vertical slices? Is it hourly? All that kind of stuff. And then maybe rating system too. What are other people saying around them? That's probably like the big box of stuff I would see. So I'd see like, Acme agency, then I would see like, Bad Dog agency. I would see all those things listed like that first. And then when you click inside of the page, like you click the box, you'd go into like, Acme agency, then you'd see the details, a little blurb about who they are. You see maybe a couple key people, key projects they've worked on, maybe a demo or something, et cetera, something like that. Other options are maybe the first page you see is kind of like, it's like a rental website, right? Like where you go in, the first screen is like, okay, where do you want this work to take place? Like it's like a big search bar. Like I want it to be here. I have this much of a budget, and it's a slider, minimum, maximum. I want this many people. Hit search, boom, throws me up all the results based on those criteria. You could do something like that too.
Yeah. Okay. So many ideas. Thank you.
Exactly.
Can I make an observation that one of the top paid apps is Natural Moose Calls for $16.99? Yeah.
Did I
I'm
hear
assuming-
this correct? Is actual moose calls like whatever I don't even know what they sound like, to be honest, but yeah, whatever they sound like, is that what that is?
I'm unwilling to pay $17 to find out, but but I'm guessing it's probably for hunting. I guess you can't hunt moose, can you? Okay, yeah, you can.
Interesting. It's kind of like the Duck Dynasty people, right? With the little cracker things or whatever that they ended up doing and becoming famous for. I would say why just moose though? Why not do all animal sounds, right? Like if that is truly what that is, I feel like that's a steep price just for moose. I would kind of be like, do I really want to download another app for like ducks and moose and I don't know, whatever the hell other things people hunt? Kind of feels like just put them all in one app. Like how many sounds, how big could it actually be? Like data files for like voice stuff isn't that big, really. You just blare that through your phone, or like maybe you can play it through a Bluetooth speaker. You're just walking around in the forest carrying it on your back.
It's a whole 24 audio tracks. I don't even understand.
Wow, that's less than $1 a track. I guess that's pretty good.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. This application was designed and created to allow you to practice your vocalizations by reproducing real moose sounds.
I really like the abridge you sent, Daniel. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're really quite interesting. That one I think that one I found through. I want to say one of my contacts at Accenture pointed that out and said like that's a really cool one to look into. The other one that I sent out, the block, the Nava PBC, those guys are really cool because they actually do a lot of real good social good work, more in the US than Canada, but they basically redesigned like social websites, like government websites to make them more accessible and pretty much all the stuff we're talking around like letting people be able to actually do things that they need to, like making them faster. I think when Obamacare went into effect back in when he initially announced it, like the website crashed. A lot of people couldn't get it for a really long time. So this company, these small nonprofits, came together and said, you know, why don't we redesign it from the ground up and make sure that it works properly? And what they did is they coded it and designed it properly so that number one, it's super accessible. Number two, it's built with modern web standards so that you know, it works for everybody and it doesn't fall apart. And they've been doing this subtly for the last, I don't know, like 8 to 10 years now, just fixing and doing things as they can. They're not a huge team, but they are trying to do a lot of good. So that's kind of stuff I really like, and that's the kind of stuff that really motivates me to be in design and be in tech, is to like do a lot of power of good. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff out there for sure.
Awesome.
All right, we're also coming up at time. It's about a minute left. So just a few things. I threw in the course outline and the first assignment in the folders under lectures in term 2, new folder there for you guys on Moodle, or sorry, on the server, not in Moodle, server. But I also will throw this up onto Moodle as well if it isn't already up there. But I also put it into Slack as well. So both the assignment sheet and the course outline are on Slack. So feel free to download them there. I also threw in the link to the Medium article that I had earlier, and I also had a link to the prototyping thing that I showed you within Figma too. Actually, I should also put these, the ones I just shared with Lee, out as well into here in case anyone wants to take a look at them. Abridge is really cool. Again, it's more medical and stuff, and same with Nava. They're not huge things, but they're definitely there. So feel free to take a look if that interests you. Other than that, yeah, that's about it. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I know it's just the start of, but I will see you guys back here next week, and we'll continue on with working on stuff and researching and all the good fun stuff. But in the meantime, if you have any questions or you want to just kind of spitball stuff off me or bounce anything off me, you're always welcome to Slack me or email me, and we can go from there. Otherwise, have a great night, and I will see you guys next week.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thanks, Daniel.
Daniel. Have a
Bye-bye.
good night, everyone.
Good
Yep.
luck
Thank
with your
you.
new
Thank you.
class.
I'll let you guys know how they are.
Good night, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.